Ethan Cole had learned to tell trouble by its sound. In war, it was the click of a hammer. On the ridge, it was the cry of a child. No three. Thin, piercing, and carried by the wind like a warning. Somewhere in the snowbound pines, someone was running out of time. And Ethan knew the cold could kill faster than any bullet. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind shoved against Ethan's coat as he dismounted, boots sinking into the drift with a muffled crunch. The cries came again, faint but steady, each one twisting tighter in his chest. He looped the reins around a pine branch and pushed forward through knee-high snow. The trees thinned to a small clearing where a wagon lay half collapsed, its wheels buried and the canvas ripped like paper. A figure was huddled beside it. Her back to him, shoulders curved in a way that spoke of both exhaustion and defense. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, cautious. She turned just enough for him to see her face, pale lips, cracked eyes sharp, even in weakness. She cradled 3 small bundles against her chest, each one whimpering under worn blankets. "Don't come closer," she rasped. "They might be near." "Who?" Her head dropped for a moment as if the word itself weighed too much. "Him." Ethan knelt, the snow seeping cold into his knees. "You're freezing. The babies, too. If we stay out here, you'll all be gone before morning." She hesitated, clutching the bundles tighter, her knuckles white. "I don't even know you. My name's Ethan Cole," he said, steady as stone. "And I'm not leaving you here." One of the babies gave a thin, desperate cry, and that seemed to break whatever barrier she was holding. She sagged forward, and Ethan caught her before she hit the snow. "You're safe now," he told her, though part of him knew safety was a promise he might have to fight for before the night was over. He carried her and the children to his horse, securing them carefully before swinging into the saddle. The trail back to his cabin was a long, winding path along the ridge, the kind that vanished under fresh snow if you weren't fast. Halfway there, she stirred. "Claire," she murmured. "What?" "My name—" "Claire Dalton." Ethan glanced down at her. Her eyes were open now, looking past him into the white silence. "If he comes—" "He won't," Ethan said. But the way he tightened his grip on the reins told another truth. If he did come, there'd be no turning away. When they reached the cabin, Ethan kicked the door shut behind them and laid her on his bed, the baby still pressed to her chest. He lit the fire until it roared, filling the room with a heat that stung after so much cold. Claire's eyes moved to the rifle leaning in the corner. "You keep that loaded." "Always," Ethan said, handing her a cup of warm milk. As the babies drank in turn, the tension in her shoulders eased just enough to let exhaustion take her. Ethan sat nearby, listening to the storm build outside. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a horse on the trail. But when he looked out the window, there was only snow and dark. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the ridge waited. The fire's glow washed the room in gold, but it couldn't quite touch the cold that lingered in Claire's eyes. Ethan set another log on the flames, watching the sparks twist upward before settling back into the embers. Outside, the wind was shifting, carrying with it a sound he didn't like, not the steady sigh of a storm, but the occasional break like something moving against it. Claire stirred in the bed, her arm curled around the 3 small shapes beside her. One of the girls whimpered, and she soothed her with a low hum. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of lullaby born from long nights of keeping fear at bay. "You sleep much?" Ethan asked without turning from the fire. She shook her head. "Not when I have to listen for him." Ethan finally looked at her. "He won't come up here easy. Ridge isn't friendly to men who think the world bends for them." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "You don't know him." "Don't have to," Ethan replied. "I know the type." She didn't answer, but her hand tightened protectively over the nearest bundle. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, the kind that carried the weight of things not yet said. When dawn broke, the snow had stopped, but the sky held the dull gray of a day that wouldn't warm. Ethan stepped outside, his breath curling into the air, and scanned the ridge. The trail from yesterday had already begun to vanish under a crust of ice, but there at the far tree line a disturbance. Tracks. Too many to be deer. He crouched, running his glove along the impressions. 4 horses. Heavy riders. The pattern told him they hadn't passed by. They'd circled. Back inside, he closed the door and bolted it. "We've got company sniffing around," he told Claire. Her lips parted, a shadow crossing her face. It's him. Could be, Ethan said. Could also be the men he sends ahead. Either way, they know you're here now. Claire sat up, pulling her shawl tight. Then they won't stop. Neither will I, Ethan said simply. The day passed in slow, deliberate work. Ethan reinforced the shutters with extra crossbars, set a second latch on the back door, and laid his rifle within easy reach. Claire kept to the cradle, feeding the girls and rocking them until their small bodies went slack with sleep. Late afternoon, Ethan caught a flicker of movement beyond the south window, a glint of light on metal there, and gone in the space of a breath. He moved to the wall, peering from a narrow gap in the boards. Nothing. The trees stood still, the snow untouched except for a faint line of prints fading into shadow. By nightfall, the cabin felt smaller, the walls holding in not just heat, but the pressure of waiting. Ethan sat at the table, cleaning the rifle with steady, practiced hands. Claire watched him, her face unreadable. You've done this before, she said finally. He looked up. A time or two. What happened? Men decided they could take what wasn't theirs. I disagreed. And did you win? Ethan slid the bolt back into place. I'm still here. The answer seemed to settle something in her. She leaned back, eyes drifting toward the fire. I ran because I thought if I could get far enough, I'd be free. But he's not the kind of man who lets go. Then he's the kind who learns the hard way, Ethan said. A log split in the fire, sending a burst of sparks into the air. The babies stirred, one letting out a soft cry before settling again. Ethan stood crossing to the window. The moon was high now, silvering the snow, making every shadow sharper. That's when he saw it, a figure at the edge of the yard just beyond the reach of the light. The man stood still for a long moment, then turned back into the trees. Ethan exhaled slowly. They're testing us. Claire's voice was almost a whisper. How long until they stopped testing? Ethan's eyes stayed on the dark line of the forest. When they think it costs too much to keep trying. The hours dragged. Around midnight, a faint knock came at the back shutter, followed by a voice smooth as oil. Evening, Cole. Heard you've got something of ours. Ethan didn't move. You can make this easy, the voice continued, or we can take it hard. The latch rattled once, twice. Ethan counted under his breath, 1, 2, 3, then the rifle cracked, the shutter slammed shut, and a sharp curse split the night. The footsteps retreated, muffled by snow. Claire's hands were trembling when she reached for the nearest baby. Ethan crossed the room, his voice even. They're not through yet, but they know we're not sleeping. She looked up at him, her eyes steady despite the shake in her hands. Neither am I. Ethan gave a single nod. Outside, the forest was silent again, but it was the kind of silence that waits. The next morning came with a thin veil of mist clinging to the pines. Ethan stepped outside before the sun fully cleared the ridge, his breath hanging in the cold air. The yard looked untouched, but the forest beyond told a different story. Faint tracks leading away deeper into the tree line. Whoever had been out there last night hadn't gone far. When he came back in, Claire was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with the girls in her lap. The firelight caught the dark circles under her eyes. They're still close, he said, pulling off his gloves. She didn't flinch. I know, I could feel it, like the air's heavier than it should be. Ethan poured 2 mugs of coffee, setting one in front of her. They'll try again, but they won't walk through that door unless they're ready to pay for it. Claire took the cup, but her gaze drifted to the rifle on the table. What if he doesn't care what it costs? Then I'll make sure he pays more than he can afford. The day passed with the kind of quiet that wasn't peace, just a pause before the next move. Ethan spent hours in the yard under the pretense of chopping wood, but his real work was watching the ridge. Mid-afternoon, a flash of movement caught his eye near the bend in the trail. 2 riders moving slow, stopping often as if measuring the land. They never came closer than the tree line, but their presence was deliberate. Back inside, he told Claire, they're mapping the place, looking for a weak side. She shifted one of the babies onto her shoulder. Is there one? Ethan met her eyes. Not if I'm standing in it. By nightfall, the tension had stretched thin enough to hum. Claire moved through the small space quietly, her motions efficient but taut. She kept glancing toward the windows, and each time Ethan caught her doing it, she would look away quickly, as if refusing to let fear take up more room. The knock came later than before, just when the fire had burned down to embers. This time it wasn't soft, it was 3 hard raps on the front door. Ethan stood rifle in hand and called out, "You're not welcome here." A laugh drifted back low and slow. "Funny thing about welcome, it doesn't matter when you're taking back what's yours." Claire stiffened. "It's him," she whispered. "Dalton." Ethan called, his voice cutting through the dark. "You've got 5 seconds to turn around." The voice outside lost its humor. "You think you can hide my wife and my blood from me? I'll burn that cabin to the ground." Ethan stepped closer to the door, his tone calm but edged with steel. "You'll do nothing but leave, or you'll find out how quick you can freeze under this snow." For a moment, the silence on the other side was so sharp it felt like it might splinter. Then came the sound of footsteps crunching away, fading into the woods. Claire exhaled slowly, but Ethan didn't relax. That wasn't a retreat. That was him measuring how close he can get before testing me. She nodded, her jaw set. "Then we make sure he never crosses that line." The next morning brought more signs of their watcher's boot prints under the kitchen window, a cigarette stub left smoldering in the snow. It wasn't just Dalton anymore. There were at least 3 others, maybe more, and they were getting bolder. Around midday, hoofbeats sounded on the trail. Ethan reached for the rifle, but when the rider came into view, it wasn't Dalton. It was Sheriff Hale Coat, dusted with frost, his horse steaming in the cold. "Thought I'd check in," Hale said, dismounting. His eyes swept the yard, taking in the tracks. "You've had visitors." 3 nights running," Ethan replied. "Last night Dalton knocked on the door." Hale's jaw tightened. "You know I can't make a case unless he steps over the law. But if he does, I'll be here." Claire stepped into the doorway, the girls bundled in her arms. "Sheriff? He won't stop, law or no law." Hale looked at her, his tone gentler. "Then we make sure when he does stop, it's for good." They spoke in low voices on the porch, laying out watch points and signals. Hale would stay close for a few nights, keeping his camp hidden down the slope. When he rode off to set up, Ethan turned back to Claire. "We'll get through this." Her reply was quiet but certain. "I'm not running again." That night the wind rose, rattling the shutters like impatient hands. Ethan sat near the fire rifle, resting across his knees, listening for the one sound he knew would come, the change in the night that meant the game was about to start. It came just past midnight, the muffled thud of boots in snow, more than one pair moving toward the door. The boots stopped just outside the door. No knock this time, just the quiet scrape of leather shifting on wood like they were testing their weight on the porch. Ethan rose from his chair, rifle in hand, eyes never leaving the door. The fire crackled behind him, throwing a wavering light across the walls. Claire was already up, moving the girls into the far corner, her back shielding them. A voice came low and deliberate. "Cole, we can see the smoke from your fire. You're warm. They're cold. Hand them over and we'll let you walk away." Ethan's reply was steady. "You've got 5 seconds to get off my porch." The man outside gave a short laugh. 5 seconds? That's generous." Another voice, rougher, cut in. "Kick it in." Before the words settled, the door shuddered under a hard boot. Ethan swung the rifle up, sighting on the splintering wood. "One more kick and you're limping home," he called. They hesitated. Snow shifted under their boots. Then came the sound of someone stepping down off the porch. "Go around back," the first voice ordered. Ethan moved fast, crossing to the back door. He unlatched it, stepped out into the cold, and leveled the rifle toward the shadows between the trees. "Not that way either," he said. The figures froze. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the pines. Then one of them cursed and turned away. From the ridge below, a different voice rang out, firm and unshakable. "You boys got a short memory, or you just like playing with fire." Sheriff Hale emerged from the dark, his revolver already drawn. "I told you last time, leave this ridge alone." The men stepped back, but the one in front, tall, broad-shouldered face, half hidden by a scarf, didn't move. His eyes found Ethan's. "You can hide her here, but she's mine, and I'll take her back one way or another." Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened. "She's not yours. Not now. Not ever." The man stared a moment longer, then jerked his head toward the trees. The others followed, disappearing into the dark. Hale stepped up onto the porch, his eyes still scanning the tree line. That was him, wasn't it? Ethan nodded. Dalton! The sheriff's mouth set into a hard line. He's testing the edges, seeing how far he can push before I've got grounds to put him in a cell. Claire appeared in the doorway, the girl silent in her arms. And in the meantime, Hale said, we keep him out of this cabin. The sheriff stayed that night setting a watch schedule with Ethan. One kept the fire, the other kept the lookout. The hours were long broken only by the low creak of the timbers and the occasional call of a night bird. Near dawn, Ethan caught sight of movement again, a lone rider cutting across the lower trail. The figure didn't come close, just stopped on a ridge opposite the cabin. The man sat there still as stone watching the smoke rise from the chimney. Then he turned and vanished behind the trees. Inside, Claire was tending the girls when Ethan came in. She looked up at him, reading his face before he spoke. He's not done, she said. No, Ethan admitted. But neither are we. Hale left at midday, promising to circle back with supplies and maybe an extra deputy. Once the sheriff was gone, the quiet returned, but it wasn't the quiet of safety. It was the quiet of a field before the first shot. Ethan busied himself checking the traps, splitting more wood, anything to keep his mind from the stillness pressing in on all sides. Claire moved about her work too, though he could see the way her eyes kept tracking the windows, the way her shoulders stayed tense, even when she smiled at the girls. When the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of bruised steel, Ethan lit the lamps. If they come tonight, he said, we hold them here, no matter what. Claire met his eyes. I can fight too. I know, Ethan said quietly, but you've already fought enough for a lifetime. Let me carry it this time. Night fell hard. The fire cast long shadows across the floor. The sound came just past midnight, not boots, but the slow crunch of wagon wheels. Ethan's stomach turned cold. A wagon meant they were planning to stay. Claire's eyes went wide. What are they doing? Ethan checked the rifle, then moved to the window. Out there in the moonlight, he saw it, the wagon pulling up just beyond the yard, 4 men climbing down. Dalton stood among them, hands resting casually on his belt, as if he already owned the place. They're done talking, Ethan said. The wagon sat like a shadow in the moonlight, its wheels half buried in snow. 4 men stood with Dalton, their shapes black against the pale ground. No one moved, but the air felt like it had teeth. Ethan stayed at the window, his breath fogging the glass. They're setting up camp, he said quietly. Claire stepped closer, her arms tight around the girls. Why? Why not just come now? Because they want me off balance, Ethan answered, and they want you scared enough to open the door. Dalton's voice rose across the yard, smooth and mocking. Cole, you really think a door's going to keep me from what's mine? Ethan unlatched the window shutter just enough to see the man's face. Dalton was smiling, but there was nothing warm in it. She's not yours, Ethan called back, and the longer you stand there, the colder your bones get. Dalton laughed. You think you're the only man who's seen a winter I've buried men in snow deeper than this? One of his men stepped forward, raising a lantern to study the cabin. Ethan noted the gesture. They were marking firing lines, figuring angles. He pulled the shutter closed and turned to Claire. Get the girls into the crawl space under the bed. Keep them quiet no matter what happens. Claire's eyes held his for a long moment. And you? I'll be where I need to be. She didn't argue, just moved quickly to hide the children. Ethan checked the rifle again, the motion steady and practiced. The first shot came without warning. A splinter of wood erupted from the front shutter, followed by another that punched through the wall near the door. Ethan dropped low-sighted through the gap and fired back. The man with the lantern went down hard, the light tumbling into the snow and going out. Shouts erupted. 2 men rushed the porch boots, pounding the boards. Ethan fired once, and one of them staggered back into the yard. The other dove for the corner of the cabin out of sight. Dalton's voice cut through the chaos. Cole, I'm giving you one last chance. You already had yours. Ethan shot back. From the back of the cabin came the sharp crack of a branch, someone circling around. Ethan moved fast, grabbing the second rifle from the rack and sliding out the back door. The cold hit him like a slap, but he ignored it, scanning the tree line. A shadow broke from the pines, and Ethan's shot dropped the man before he reached the wall. Inside, Claire crouched with the girls, listening to every sound. When the back door slammed, she flinched, but Ethan's voice came low and urgent. They're pulling back. For now. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the whole truth either. The yard was littered with churned snow and dark shapes, but the wagon was still there, and Dalton was still standing. "You got grit," Cole Dalton called. "I'll give you that. But you can't keep this up forever." Ethan stepped to the porch, rifle in hand, long enough to make sure you never try again. Dalton didn't move. The two men still standing with him stared hard at Ethan, weighing their chances. Finally, Dalton tipped his hat. "We'll see about that." They climbed back into the wagon, turning it toward the trail. The wheels creaked, fading into the night. Inside, Claire emerged from the bedroom, the girls bundled against her. "Is it over?" Ethan shook his head. "Not until he's too far from this ridge to find his way back." They spent the rest of the night in a tense quiet, the fire low, both of them listening for any sign the wagon might return. But morning came with nothing but the stillness of snow. Ethan stepped outside, scanning the yard. The tracks led away toward the lower valley, but he knew better than to think it was finished. Dalton was the kind of man who turned retreat into a new plan. When he came back in, Claire was staring into the fire. "He won't stop Ethan, not until one of you's gone." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not waiting for him to choose the time." Her eyes widened. "You're going after him. I'm making sure he doesn't get the chance to come back," Ethan replied, voice low. The girls stirred soft sounds of waking innocence against the hard edge of what had to be done. Ethan looked at them, then back at Claire. "He came here thinking you'd still be his. He needs to understand you're not his to take, not now, not ever." Claire swallowed hard, but her voice was steady. "Then make sure he understands." Ethan nodded once. The snow might slow him, but it would slow Dalton too. And this time the man wouldn't see him coming. The snow was still falling when Ethan strapped on his gear. He moved with quiet purpose, checking each piece of his kit, every round of ammunition, every strap on his pack. Claire watched from the table, her hands folded tight in her lap. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. Ethan shook his head. "If I take you and the girls, he'll smell fear. If I leave you here with Hale's watch, he'll think you're bait. Either way, I have to end this before he circles back." Claire's eyes didn't leave his. "And if you don't come back, I will," Ethan said, not because he believed it without question, but because she needed to hear it. By first light, he was gone, his boots breaking the thin crust of snow as he followed the wagon tracks downhill. The cold bit deep, but he welcomed it. It kept his senses sharp. Dalton's trail was easy enough to follow at first. The heavy wagon wheels had carved deep ruts, the horses' hooves leaving churned prints on either side. But an hour into the valley, the track split, one set veering off toward the river, the other pressing deeper into the pines. Ethan crouched, running a glove over the prints. "Splitting the party," he muttered. It was a tactic to throw him off, but he'd hunted long enough to know which trail belonged to the man who thought he owned everything he saw. He followed the line into the pines. The forest closed around him, muting the wind. Every step sank with a muffled crunch, the smell of cold earth mixing with resin from the evergreens. He slowed when he saw movement ahead, not Dalton, but one of his men crouched behind a fallen log with a rifle. Ethan dropped to a knee, raising his own weapon. The shot was quick, clean. The man fell into the snow without a sound. Ethan moved past him without looking back. By midday, the tracks led him to a narrow pass where the cliffs funneled the trail into a choke point. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and that meant Dalton knew he was being followed. Ethan slid behind a boulder and waited. The wind shifted, carrying voices low, sharp, deliberate. He caught Dalton's tone immediately. "Keep him in the pass. Make him think we're ahead of him." Ethan smiled to himself. "You're not as clever as you think." He moved upslope using the rock and snow for cover. From above, he saw two men lying prone, rifles aimed at the trail below. He took the first with a single shot, the second before the echo faded. Dalton's shout cut through the pass. "Cole, you think you can pick us off one at a time?" Ethan stepped into view, rifle steady. "I think I just did." Dalton's figure emerged from behind a tree. Broad shoulders, squared revolver in hand, his smile was slow, deliberate. "You got guts. I'll give you that. But this ends one way." "That's the first thing you've been right about," Ethan said. They stood there 30 paces apart, the snow falling harder now, clinging to their coats and hair. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. Dalton took a step forward, the revolver lowering just slightly. "I didn't come all this way to lose her to a man like you." She was never yours to lose. Ethan, said his voice calm even. The revolver snapped up, but Ethan had already moved. His shot rang out, striking Dalton in the shoulder and spinning him sideways. Dalton staggered, the gun slipping from his grip. You think that's enough to stop me? Dalton snarled, clutching his wound. Ethan advanced, his rifle still aimed. If it's not, I'll make sure the next one is. Dalton's eyes darted to the side, and Ethan caught the flicker of movement just in time. Another man charged from the trees, a knife flashing in his hand. Ethan turned, fired, and the man dropped in the snow a few feet from him. When he looked back, Dalton was gone, his blood marking a trail deeper into the forest. Ethan's jaw tightened. The hunt wasn't over. He adjusted his grip on the rifle and started after him, the snow already beginning to cover the drops of red. The forest pressed in tight, every tree a shadow, every gust of wind carrying the hiss of snow through the branches. Ethan followed the drops of blood, each one a promise that Dalton was still ahead. But the snowfall was turning heavier, erasing the trail almost as soon as it appeared. He moved quickly, boots sinking into drifts that reached his calves, rifle ready. The silence here was different, not the stillness of peace, but the coiled breath of something waiting. Somewhere ahead a branch cracked. Ethan froze. The sound was faint, but in the muffled world of falling snow it might as well have been a gunshot. He eased forward one step at a time until the trail bent around a stand of pines. Dalton was there, leaning against a tree, his coat dark with blood at the shoulder. He had one hand braced against the bark, the other clutching a revolver. His eyes met Ethan's with a mix of pain and fury. "You just don't know when to quit," Dalton said, his voice hoarse. "Neither do you," Ethan replied. Dalton laughed short, bitter. "You think you're the first man to try and take something from me? You think you're the first to believe he's the better man? You're not worth taking anything from," Ethan said, stepping closer. "I'm here to end what you started." Dalton straightened, wincing as he lifted the revolver. "Then come and take your shot." The air between them thickened. Ethan could hear the wind howl high above the trees, could feel the sting of ice against his face. Dalton's revolver wavered, but his eyes never left Ethan's. Before either of them fired, another sound cut through the moment, the heavy crunch of boots from behind. Ethan turned just enough to see two more men emerging from the trees, rifles in hand. Dalton's smile widened. "Thought I'd let you think you had me alone," he said. "But I never walk into the cold without insurance." The first man raised his rifle and Ethan dove sideways, rolling into the snow as the shot cracked past his ear. He came up, firing, dropping the shooter in a spray of powder and red. The second man charged, and Ethan's boot caught him square in the knee, sending him sprawling. Dalton took the chance to move, but his wound slowed him. Ethan closed the gap in 3 strides, knocking the revolver from his hand and shoving him hard against the tree. "This is over," Ethan said, his voice low, steady. Dalton's breath came fast, steaming in the cold. "You think killing me changes anything? Men like me don't disappear. There's always another." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then I'll deal with them too." For a moment, neither moved. The wind picked up, shaking the branches overhead. Snow fell in thick sheets, coating their shoulders, their hats, their faces. Dalton's eyes flickered again, not toward another man this time, but toward a narrow path between the trees. Ethan glanced that way and saw it the faint outline of a trail leading toward the ridge, and beyond it the valley. If Dalton reached it, he could vanish into the wilderness and be back for Claire before spring. Ethan stepped back just enough to draw aim. Dalton saw it coming. "You don't have the rifle's crack cut him off." Dalton staggered, a look of shock crossing his face before he dropped to his knees in the snow. Ethan lowered the rifle, breathing hard. The forest seemed to exhale with him. The only sound now was the slow settling of snow around them. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the still form in the drift. Then he turned toward the ridge, scanning for any other movement. There was none. The way back to the cabin was uphill and the storm was deepening. Ethan adjusted the rifle over his shoulder and started walking, each step heavy but certain. Claire was waiting, and she needed to know it was done. The storm was in full voice by the time Ethan reached the ridge. Wind clawed at his coat, driving snow sideways into his face, but he pushed on. Each step felt heavier, not from the climb, but from the weight of what he'd done and what it meant. By the time the cabin came into view, the world was nothing but white and shadow. Smoke curled from the chimney, warm against the steel-gray sky. That small sign of life pulled him forward. Claire met him at the door, her eyes searching his face before she spoke. "It's over." Ethan stepped inside, closing the cold behind him. "It's over," he said simply. She stared at him for a long moment, her lips trembling, then she reached for him. The embrace was fierce, almost desperate, her hands gripping the back of his coat. He could feel her heart beat against his chest, fast and uneven. The girls peeked from the bedroom doorway, their eyes wide. Claire turned her voice soft but steady. "It's all right now. You're safe." Ethan knelt, meeting their gaze. "No one's coming for you again." One of the girls, the youngest, stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. He felt the small warmth of her trust, and something in him loosened for the first time in weeks. Claire guided the children back to the bedroom, settling them with blankets and a small tin cup of warm milk. When she returned, her eyes were different, softer, but also shadowed by a thought she hadn't spoken. "You killed him," she said, not as a question. Ethan met her gaze. "I did." She nodded slowly, her hands twisting in front of her. "Part of me's relieved. The other part, it's just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of running." Ethan set his rifle against the wall. "You won't have to run anymore." "But the fight, that doesn't end just because one man's gone. There'll always be others like him, men who think they can take what they want." Claire stepped closer, her eyes locking on his. "Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for them to come to us. Maybe it's time we choose where we live instead of where we hide." Her words caught him off guard. "You want to leave?" "I want the girls to grow up in a place where the first sound in the morning isn't the wind through a broken door," she said. "You've been standing guard for so long, Ethan. Maybe it's time you stand for something else." The fire popped in the hearth, filling the silence. Ethan looked at her, then at the room, the patched walls, the worn table, the rifle rack by the door. This place had been his refuge, his battleground, and now it felt too small for what came next. "You're right," he said finally. "We'll leave, but not until the thaw. The valley's not forgiving this time of year." Claire's shoulders eased, though her eyes still held the weight of caution. "Until then, we make this place ours. Not his, not anyone else's." Ethan gave a small nod. "Ours." They spent the rest of the day mending the damage from the fight. Boards went over bullet holes, fresh logs stacked by the hearth. The girls helped in their small ways, fetching nails, holding a lantern steady, their laughter slowly returning, shy but real. That night, as the wind eased outside, Ethan sat by the fire, Claire beside him. Her head rested against his shoulder, the flicker of the flames painting gold in her hair. "You ever think about what it's like in those big towns?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Crowded, loud, too many people to keep track of." "Maybe that's the point," she said. "In a crowd you can disappear, no one watching you, no one waiting for you to slip." He considered that, staring into the fire. "Maybe. But I've never been much for disappearing." She looked up at him, her expression somewhere between a smile and a question. "Then maybe we don't disappear. Maybe we just start fresh." Ethan didn't answer right away, but he knew she was right. Dalton's shadow was gone, but the future was still unwritten. And for the first time in years, he could imagine it being theirs to shape. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and steady, covering the tracks in the yard, wiping clean the evidence of what had happened here. By morning, it would look like nothing had ever disturbed this ridge. But inside, they would remember, and they would decide where the next trail began. By late March, the snow had begun to give way in patches, revealing dark soil and stubborn grass beneath. The air carried a different weight now, still cold, but with the faint scent of wet earth and pine sap. The ridge no longer felt locked in ice, and that meant their time here was nearly up. Ethan had spent the last week repairing the wagon, checking the harnesses, and stockpiling supplies. Claire had been packing what little they owned into crates, while the girls whispered excitedly about what a new town might look like. It was during one of these afternoons, with the sun slipping low over the valley, that Ethan saw the rider. At first, it was just a dark speck moving along the lower trail. He narrowed his eyes, one hand drifting toward the rifle leaning against the porch. The figure drew closer, the horse's gait steady, unhurried. Whoever it was, they weren't in a rush, which in Ethan's experience could mean they thought they had the advantage. Claire came to the doorway. "Someone you know?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." When the rider reached the yard, they dismounted in one smooth motion. The man was tall, wearing a weathered coat and a hat pulled low. His face was lean-lined from sun and wind, and his eyes were a sharp gray that seemed to weigh everything they looked at. "You, Cole?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. "Who's asking names, Briggs? I worked with Dalton once." Claire stiffened behind the doorframe. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly on the rifle stock. "If you're here for revenge, you rode a long way for nothing." Briggs shook his head slowly. "Not revenge. Business." Ethan almost laughed. "I don't do business with Dalton's kind." "Dalton's kind," Briggs said with a faint smirk, "isn't all the same. Some of us knew when to keep our hands clean. I heard what you did, and I'm not here to change it. I'm here because Dalton owed me, and now that debt falls on you." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "That's not how it works. It is if what he owed me was a man's word to deliver something or someone." Briggs glanced past Ethan into the cabin. Claire stepped fully into view. "You're wasting your time." Briggs's smirk faded. "Lady, I don't aim to hurt you, but I figure you've been running long enough to know that trouble doesn't vanish. It just changes its face." Ethan stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between them. "If you've got something to say it now." Briggs didn't flinch. "Dalton made enemies besides me. Men with longer reach and colder patience. They'll hear he's gone, and when they do, they'll look to settle his debts by taking what mattered to him." "And you think that's her?" Ethan said flatly. Briggs shrugged. "I think it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what they think. And they're coming." Claire's voice was steady now. "So you came here to warn us or to stake a claim before they arrive?" Briggs's eyes met hers, unreadable. "I came to offer you a choice. Leave now with me and I can get you past their reach. Or stay here and you'll be defending that door again before the first buds open." Ethan didn't move. "And in exchange—" "Nothing you can't afford," Briggs said. "Just the comfort of knowing you won't have to keep looking over your shoulder." The silence stretched. The girl's laughter drifted faintly from inside a sound so fragile it almost didn't belong in this conversation. Ethan finally said, "You ride back down that trail, Briggs. If I see you again, it'll be because you brought them here. And if that happens, you won't ride back out." Briggs studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough. Just remember I gave you the chance." He mounted his horse, turning toward the valley. The sound of hooves faded into the thaw-softened air. Claire stepped beside Ethan, watching the trail. "Do you believe him?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. "I believe that if Dalton had debts, the men he owed won't care that he's dead." She drew in a slow breath. "Then maybe the fight's not over after all." Ethan looked toward the wagon, the half-packed crates. "We leave at first light, and we don't stop until we're far enough they can't find us." But even as he said it, he knew that far enough might not exist. The morning broke gray and thin, the kind of light that carried no warmth. Ethan was already up before dawn, loading the last of the crates into the wagon. The air was damp with the scent of thawing earth, and every creak of the harness felt too loud in the quiet. Claire moved quickly, wrapping the girls in shawls, her eyes scanning the tree line even as she tied knots. "We're ready," she said, but her voice carried the same tight edge Ethan felt in his gut. He climbed onto the driver's bench, taking the reins. "Hold on tight," he told her. "Once we get to the ridge road, we don't stop for anything." The wagon rolled forward, wheels groaning in the soft ground. The trail out was narrow, flanked by trees heavy with melting snow. Birds called above a false note of peace in a world that was holding its breath. They had gone less than a mile when Ethan caught it, the faint drumming of hooves behind them. "Riders," he muttered. Claire's head whipped around. "How many enough?" He urged the horses faster, the wagon lurching as the trail dipped and twisted. The girls clung to Claire, eyes wide. Through the gaps in the trees, Ethan glimpsed movement. Dark shapes weaving between the trunks, closing in. The rhythm of hooves was faster now, sharper. Whoever Briggs had warned them about had found them. A shout rang out from behind. Then the crack of a rifle. Bark exploded from a tree beside them. Ethan snapped the reins harder. "Get down!" he called to Claire. She pulled the girls to the floorboards, shielding them with her body. The trail narrowed ahead into a rocky pass, the only way forward. Ethan steered hard into it, the wagon's wheels scraping stone. The sound of pursuit grew louder. One rider broke from the trees on their right, trying to cut them off. Ethan grabbed his rifle from the bench, fired without slowing. The man fell back, his horse rearing and bolting into the pines. Another shot came from behind, grazing the wagon's sideboard. The horses spooked, nearly veering into the rocks, but Ethan steadied them with a hard pull. They burst from the pass into open ground, and that's when Ethan saw Briggs. He was waiting on horseback near a stand of aspens, a rifle across his lap. His eyes locked on Ethan's for the briefest moment before he raised the weapon and fired. Not at them, but at the riders behind. One went down instantly. Ethan didn't question it. He drove the wagon toward Briggs, who spurred his horse alongside. "Keep going!" Briggs shouted over the thunder of hooves. "There's a fork a mile ahead. Take the left, they won't follow past the ravine." Ethan didn't ask how he knew. He just leaned into the reins, every muscle tight with focus. The fork appeared exactly where Briggs had said, two rutted paths splitting through the trees. Ethan yanked the team left, the wagon jolting hard. Behind them, the riders hesitated, then most broke right, disappearing into the woods. A few tried to follow, but Briggs dropped two more with clean, precise shots. The rest peeled away, their shouts fading. By the time they reached the ravine, the only sound was the rush of water below and the panting of the horses. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop, his hand still gripping the reins tight. The girls sat up slowly, eyes blinking against the sudden calm. Claire looked from him to Briggs, her face unreadable. "You came back," she said to Briggs. Briggs shrugged. "Told you I don't aim to hurt you. Besides," he glanced at Ethan. "Dalton owed me, but I'm not collecting from the dead. Guess I just didn't want to see his enemies win either." Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "You've got your own road to ride." Briggs gave a faint smile. "So do you. Make it count." With that, he turned his horse and rode off into the trees, vanishing like smoke. Ethan exhaled, the tension finally loosening in his chest. He looked at Claire, then at the girls. "We keep moving," he said, "and this time we don't look back." Claire's hand found his warm despite the cold air. "No," she said softly. "We don't." The wagon rolled forward again, wheels cutting a fresh trail into ground no one had claimed yet. The forest opened ahead, the light shifting warmer as the day wore on. And somewhere beyond that horizon, a new life waited, one they'd fought for, one they'd take on their own terms. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't need to. The sound of the wheels and the horses' hooves was enough, a steady rhythm carrying them away from the past and toward whatever came next.